Are you sure?
Here's the 30-second lesson on what legends know. Never ask a bride why she's getting married. Don't wear a skirt on a windy day. Deodorant is not a shower. Don't sniff chili flakes. And don't forget, saving is not investing. Legends don't just save, they invest in mutual funds. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
So overpowering and overwhelming is the flow of international news these days that are great, formidable. Indian politics is finding it difficult to compete with it. Headlines are all coming from international news. As we know right now, the latest big headline has come from the Middle East. That is the assassination or killing of Yahya Sinwar, 62, the current head only for a few months, head only after the July 31 killing of his predecessor, who was Ismail Haniyeh, who was assassinated in Tehran while he was there attending the inauguration of the new president of Iran, who had succeeded his predecessor, who had died in a mysterious helicopter crash not long ago. That said, Yahya Sinwar has now been killed. Chances are most of you have seen the videos. I will explain some of the context there. Also, who Yahya Sinwar was. I will go into some detail. Who are his likely successors? Who are the other leaders? What is the record of Hamas leaders? Also, why Hamas is Hamas and Hezbollah is Hezbollah and how different they are. What I like to say is that it's a bit like one is physics, one is math, but they have common chemistry, right? One is Shia, one is Sunni, Hezbollah is Shia, Hamas is Sunni. So one is physics, one is math, both things that I was challenged by, but they have common chemistry because their objective is the same. That said, we will talk about this in detail. We'll also talk about some of the politics around this assassination and what might happen as a result of this, for better or worse. At the same time, I know many of you have been complaining that I stopped doing that Hindi show, Headlines Ki Piche, which I used to do with my colleague Apurva Mandhani, where I answered questions from you. So I will be resuming that, but I need ideas from you on how to make it better. Right? We'll do it very soon because we know that we have to also improve and enhance our Hindi offering as well. And if one is multilingual or at least bilingual, why not take advantage of that? That done, this will be now, one difference will be that I will only take questions in this case from members on our YouTube channel or our subscribers on our website. So the easiest thing to do is to take membership on our YouTube channel. That is much cheaper than even taking a subscription. So go ahead and do it, and I'll be at your service and we'll pick up your questions. And very soon that show will be back. Give me some ideas on how to make it better and maybe suggest a name as well. That done, back to the story of Gaza. Now, Yahya Sinwar was 62. He was born in 1962 in a refugee camp in Khan Yunus. Gaza has had a mixed history because Gaza, for a long time, was under Egyptian control. So Gaza is an unfortunate zone. In Egyptian control, then multiple wars take place. 1967, Six-Day War takes place. Israelis come in control. So almost everybody who lives in Gaza today was born in a refugee camp. So the anger of the refugee camp always stays because refugee camps are the most fertile places for anger, for revenge, things like that. So he was born in a refugee camp in Khan Yunus. Why were his parents in a refugee camp? Because they had been externed from one of the villages not far from Gaza, somewhere in Ashkelon area. So many Palestinian families had been expelled by the Zionists when they came in, because this was Zionism. Zionism is no abuse, it's an ideology. Zionists, when they came in, they were building the state of Israel. They were cleaning up many of these villages and pushing Palestinians here and there. So many of the Palestinians who were pushed away from these villages, they landed up in Gaza, as was Yahya Sinwar's parents' family. The Palestinians have a word for it. They call it the Palestinian Nikba or the Palestinian catastrophe. So he was a product of that. He was a product of that. He grew up in a refugee camp. He joined the University of Gaza and got his bachelor's degree in Arabic studies. Now, he was by this time already quite indoctrinated. In 1987, you can see that he was about 25 years old. In 1987, two partners, two co-founders founded Hamas. These two co-founders, both of whom were assassinated in the course of time. In fact, in the year 2004, were Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, who was mostly seen on a wheelchair, an older man, and also Aziz al-Rantisi. The first to go was Sheikh Ahmed Yassin in March 2004 when an Israeli helicopter fired missiles at his entourage, in which he was killed and 9 bodyguards were killed. This had come shortly after another attempt on his life, which had failed. 6th September 2003, an F-16 had fired missiles at him, but those missiles, other people were killed, but he had survived. Then, within a month of that, March 2004, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin was assassinated. Then his co-founder, who obviously became the head of Hamas now, Abdul Aziz al-Rantisi, he was assassinated on 17th of April 2004 when an Israeli AH-64 Apache helicopter fired hellfire missiles at his car. So he was assassinated, and that's how these two were gone. Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, he found it. He had broken away, not exactly broken away, so it's not as if he went against Muslim Brotherhood, but out of Muslim Brotherhood, he created Hamas and he started suicide bombing. So, first well known suicide bombing in the region was by Reem Riashi, REEM Reem Riashi. And this was a suicide bombing at a place called Erez Crossing, because there are many border crossings in that area with security guards and Israeli soldiers there. This was on 14th of January 2004. And he then also gave a discourse in praise of suicide bombing and saying that this was part of jihad and every Muslim owed it as their responsibility towards jihad. So that is how Hamas starts growing, and ultimately we find that Hamas leaders generally had a short half-life. They would be assassinated, or they will make peace, or they will be arrested. Yahya Sinwar himself, he did not last very long, at least as a free man. 1987, as a young man, he joined Hamas. Immediately, he was made head of what was called as the Al-Majd unit or brigade. Al-Majd, if we translate from Arabic or the tradition, it would mean the most honorable and glorious one. Now, the idea of that unit was, one, to find Israeli collaborators and punish them. Punishment meant summary execution, but also to punish people for apostasy, for not following the tenets of Islam. And that was a very harsh job, very tough job to have, and also a job that made him very prominent. So one of his earlier exploits is what got him into prison. In 1988 was the killing of 4 people allegedly for apostasy, going against Islam, tenets of Islam, or being Israeli agents. Sometimes those two things came rolled into one. So those 4 were killed. On that crime, the Israelis caught him and locked him up. He then spent time until 2011 in Israeli jail. 23 years in Israeli jail. That's a lot of life. That's more than 1/3 of his life until he was assassinated now. Now, he did not waste his time in jail, or he did not brood in jail, it seems. He, in fact, started reading up and studying in jail. So he logged into an Israeli online education program. He started studying. He learned Hebrew, and while he learned Hebrew and he learned about Israeli and Jewish culture, society, in fact, he used to claim to be some bit of an authority on Jewish culture and society and Hebrew literature, which his other colleagues were not, other comrades were not. And that is when in jail, he translated tens of thousands of pages of autobiographies and biographies of founders, leaders, and operators of Shin Bet. Shin Bet is the Israeli Domestic Intelligence Service. And he thought that he had the best knowledge, best idea of how these are functioning. How do we know? How do we know all of this? I know that in many of these cases there is a lot of folklore. In his case, he had become particularly friendly with his dentist because he obviously had some dental issues. The dentist's name was Yuval Biton. And because he spoke in detail to the dentist then later told these stories to the world. Also, he gave interviews. He was able to give an interview also to an Italian journalist, where he said, the prison actually is a crucible. It's a crucible that strengthens you, that steels you or seasons you. While in prison, however, while he glorified being in prison and he said, prison is strengthening me, I'm learning this, I'm reading this, he made several escape attempts also, including once digging a tunnel through which he thought he will get into the visitors' room and then out. But that didn't happen. He kept on sending messages through his lawyers, visitors, and also he kept on coordinating with Hamas outside. How did he get out? Please Google name Gilad Shalit. Gilad Shalit was an Israeli soldier who had been kidnapped or taken prisoner by Hamas in a raid or in a clash in 2006. So since then, Israelis had been negotiating to get him back and they were willing to pay a price in return. Finally, in 2011, there was an exchange whereby Gilad Shalit was released by Hamas. And how many prisoners did Israel release in exchange for Gilad Shalit? That was a celebrated case, a famous case, 1,047 prisoners. Yahya Sinwar was one of them. Now, some people, as they came out, I read accounts, and I will share some accounts with you and some of these stories with you. Most of these are from international publications. You will see them. Now, most of them say that most people were not repentant, and most people were actually more steeled to join the fight and go to the underground and fight the Israelis. One out said that maybe it was a mistake on my part to do this. I killed an Israeli civilian. But others also said that, look, with Israelis, there are no civilians or soldiers because every Israeli serves in the armed forces at some point of time. He came out, however, and he once again got down to his own his own quote unquote business. He got married after his release from jail, raised a family, but also in the course of time became the head of Izzad Al Qasim Brigades. Now, Izzad Al Qasim is named after a famous preacher, a famous conservative preacher who was born in the village of Jabalia or the locality of Jabalia in Syria in Ottoman days, in Ottoman era. And since then, he's been a kind of a storied preacher. He was born in 1882, so it's after him. It's after Is ad-Din al-Qasim that Is ad-Din al-Qasim brigades were formed. So Yahya Sinwar came to head that. Now he was heading that entire military operation from Gaza itself, while many of his senior commanders and many of his senior colleagues had preferred to be in the safety of Qatar. The odd one here and there, maybe the odd one in Jordan, although I don't think anybody of consequences in Jordan right now. But most of the others are in Qatar. One of them decided to go to Tehran, that is Ismail Haniyeh, and we know that he was put away. He was, however, in Gaza and fighting. But once Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated on 31st of July this year in Tehran, then as the second senior most, Yahya Sinwar became the head of Hamas, which means the head of the Politburo of Hamas. I mentioned to you about his dentist, Yuval Biton, to whom he used to tell these stories. There is also an analysis from Yuval Biton who said that his understanding was one, that Yahya Sinwar knew the Quran by heart. He knew all of the Quran, and also that his motivation was more Islamic than either ethnic or ideological. But the important thing is, and that's how it becomes very important, that the fastest and the most efficient and the most accurate, quick way of confirming that the body was Yahya Sinwar's came from a comparison of his dental records, because he had used dental services in jail. All his dental records were available. I presume Israelis have it online. Even Israeli units have this stuff online. He was, however, killed not in a targeted operation. That's how your luck runs out. He'd been in Gaza. Israelis had hit several houses where he had been, but he had survived. Israelis had raided many tunnels because there are these tunnel complexes where they thought he was there with his bodyguards and hostages for protection. They didn't find him. This was actually random patrol consisting not of special forces, not even of very experienced forces. These were young soldiers, mostly young soldiers in their statutory period of service, which is short service, and they encountered some Hamas people, three of them. There was an exchange of fire. They saw three of them running. Then they saw one run inside the house. That one, while this person was hit, they sent a drone inside to check out whether there were people inside. That is the drone footage the world has seen. And the drone footage shows an injured man covered in sand, obviously in debris. And you can see that one of his arms is injured and maybe some kind of a tourniquet had been tied around it and can't move. But as the drone comes closer to him in an act of defiance, he picks up what looks like a stick and throws at the drone. Remember, that picture will be seen many times on both sides. Israelis will see it and show it again and again to poke fun at Hamas and Hamas's top leader. The Palestinians, on the other hand, will see this picture as an act of defiance, and maybe this will inspire many of them to go the same way. So these pictures in a warlike situation, history is always interpreted differently by warring sides. That is what will happen with this defining picture as well. Now, what happens now that he's gone? So first of all, there is an expectation that with his departure, the possibility of a hostage deal and ceasefire, even if it's a temporary ceasefire, is high, because even Biden wants a ceasefire and a hostage deal. Biden and Kamala Harris both, because 5th of November is the US election. So something like this will be of big use to them, because they can say we achieved something, and also in their own support base, a lot of which is Muslim in the US, Muslim, other minorities, immigrants, where there are questions about how far will the Biden administration go in backing Netanyahu in this endless five-front war, right? I'm giving you their point of view. Everybody has a point of view. So this kind of a peace deal, if this leads to a peace deal, at least a temporary ceasefire and a return of hostages or surviving hostages, this will be a big deal for them. And that's how the interesting thing is that even Netanyahu has made a significant statement where he said, you leave and let live. What that means is you give up your arms, you free the hostages, right? And then you say that you are not going to use violence and you can be. So that is a for a negotiating strategy. That's an interesting move. That is, if anything, much better than somebody saying under no circumstances I will stop this war until the last one of you is killed. So there is a beginning there. Netanyahu also said, now that is not something you would expect to hear from Netanyahu, but he's also said this is the beginning of the end of war, and almost synchronized, as if synchronized statements have come from all Western capitals, including those that have been critical of Netanyahu. Paris, for example, calling Yahya Sinwar a terrorist, celebrating his death, and then suggesting that his death will pave the way to hostage release and a peace settlement, at least for now, or a ceasefire, at least for now. And that's where Biden has now said that Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, will soon be going to the Middle East. So let us see how that goes. Now, however, what happens to Hamas now? Because Hamas will not go away, Hamas will remain. Some leadership will come up. The question is, which leadership will come up? We saw with Hezbollah, one leader died, the next one was named successor. He was killed within a day. And his successor, likely successor, was killed within a day. And after that, Hezbollah has decided not to name his successor, because they know that that would be invitation to Israel, because Israeli penetration in these systems is very, very strong. Also, this is not really a state versus a state, because these are territories that are they've pretty much ceded their sovereignty to various forces, but especially to Israel. So nobody's going to be safe. Now, senior surviving leaders of Hamas, number one, there is Khalid Mashal. Khalid Mashal is somebody we see on TV once in a while. He was born in Ramallah, not in Gaza, Ramallah on the West Bank. He apparently is now living in Qatar. he became the head of the political office, which is the head of political bureau, like the boss, the chief, in 1996. After that, he was in Jordan when Israeli intelligence attacked him with a slow acting poison. And he was dying, at which point Israelis, in negotiations with Jordan, offered an antidote which will save his life. And obviously, Israelis got something in return, must have got, I mean, for a country that can give 1,047 high security prisoners in return for one soldier, you can see that they would have gotten their side of the bargain from the Jordanians, but his life was saved like that. Now, his life was saved like that. He went to the US. He went to the US and again started getting active. Then because of Israeli charges. Israelis laid serious charges against him. Americans arrested him. So he continued to operate from Jordan and other countries, and then continued to be the head of the political office until he stepped down in 2017 and Ismail Haniyeh took over. Doesn't look like he particularly wants to come back to the front line again. So he's somebody we can discount right now, but you never know. Right now he's in Qatar. Then there is Khalil al-Hayya. Khalil al-Hayya is also in Qatar. He is currently the deputy leader. He was Sinwar's deputy. There's been an assassination attempt on him on 2007, and that is when an airstrike was carried out, killed his family, but he survived. That's one. Then there is Musa Abu Marzouk. Musa Abu Marzouk has had an interesting life. He's been a member of the political bureau, like the Politburo. He was also a founder of the UAE branch of the Palestinian Muslim Brotherhood. From there, he went to the US in 1996. He became head of political bureau and was charged with financing of terrorists. On that charge laid by the Israelis, he was locked up in a Manhattan prison where he spent 22 months, and then he said he wasn't going to be doing any of this. He was done with militancy, terrorism, whatever you call it, and he returned to Jordan, and he's been there since then. Now with Yahya Sinwar, he said from jail also that he realized what value it was to kidnap or to take prisoner or take hostage Israeli soldiers. And he said any time an Israeli soldier would be taken prisoner, there should be joy among Palestinian prisoners because you can then carry out an exchange. So even when he was arrested in 1988, besides killing those 4 Palestinians on charges of being collaborators, etc., he'd also tried to kidnap 2 Israeli soldiers. And that's been an article of faith for him, tactically and strategically. And probably that went into his planning. He was the mastermind of the October 7 attacks, and probably that went into his planning as well, because the idea wasn't just to kill a lot of people, but to take as many hostages as possible. And you can see until this day, even after he has died, Hamas still has a bargaining, more than a bargaining chip. It's much more than a bargaining chip to have these surviving hostages, because it's also a very sensitive political point in Israel. And you can see that the Israelis released 1,047 prisoners, high security prisoners, in exchange for one soldier. So he knew that. Now let us see who emerges as Hamas's leader, or whether they announce a former leader or not. Maybe they will take some time, but the first thing to watch is now these ceasefire negotiations, if they take place, because if they happen, they will take place in Qatar and Egypt, because that's where Hamas's remaining leadership is going to be. What is Hamas? We've told you earlier, but once again, it's like Islamic resistance. It is Harkat al-Muqawama al-Islamiyah. It's gone through many iterations. In 1988, in its first charter, it made murder of Jews as its central objective. In 2017, it tried to tone itself down and it took it away. However, October 7 has changed everything. We also know that in the course of these decades, Israeli establishment has played footsie with Hamas as well. Netanyahu in particular, he looked the other way as the Qataris were allowing money and weapons to come into Hamas, because he thought that Hamas will then neutralize the Fatah organization, the more democratic Fatah organization, which was powerful in West Bank and which actually accepts the existence of the Israeli state. But because Netanyahu administration was also fundamentally not committed to a two-state solution, they thought Hamas actually will be a counter to Fatah. That, if I may say so, has also been counterproductive, and now everything is up in the air. As we speak now, Israelis are fighting on 5 fronts. There is Hamas, there is Hezbollah, there is the West Bank, there are the Houthis, and then there is Iran.